All right, hello class. This is Miss Roberts. I will be starting our first mini lesson today for writing. I hope everyone's doing okay out there, and digital learning is kind of new to me for the most part, so bear with me. We're going to go ahead and get started here with this PowerPoint. Okay, so we are continuing our piece of writing that we were working on before we went off on the weeks. And so today's mini lesson, kind of piggybacking off of last week we talked about zooming in on one moment when we're writing a story. Well, today we're going to, and you guys were able to actually create a solid draft on that. Obviously, I'm not expecting any of you guys to be done with your draft, but we're going to go back to the writing and take a look at the beginning of our stories and see where we can get some ideas of how we can begin the story effectively. Okay, so the beginning of a story sets the tone for everything that will happen next. Your goal is to really pull that reader in immediately. Some might call it a hook, some might call it a story starter, whatever it means to you. Basically, an opener or a story starter, or whatever you want to use. It's like an appetizer to a meal. You want to offer a little tasty morsel of what's to come. And so I've got 5 strategies for you guys that you will be practicing with. The first strategy is you can begin your story with dialogue or action. So here's an example of what both would look like in one, starting with a piece of action or dialogue. I crouched in the starting position, hands poised on the track and back coiled like a spring. On your mark, get set, the starting gun boomed. I launched myself forward, trying to spring ahead of the pack. Okay, so maybe this person, whoever's writing this story, is focusing on their first track meet or crossing the finish line and placing in first or second for their first track meet. And there's a lot of action in the story because you're running and you're remembering these events. So instead of saying something like, well, one day I was at a track meet, you can start with the action. Just get right to the action, pull that reader in, and bring yourself back to whatever moment that you're about to discuss. Another example of dialogue, which we'll get into later this week specifically throughout your story, you can start with a conversation. Maybe you remember a particular conversation. And again, as I was meeting with some individuals last week on their writing, when you're adding dialogue to these kinds of stories, it doesn't have to be exactly as you remember that conversation. You can kind of make it up a little bit to fit the purpose of telling your story. So don't be too stressed about getting the dialogue 100% the way. I mean, that's impossible. You're never going to remember exactly what you were talking about in that moment, but you can kind of generalize it and create that dialogue to make an interesting story. Okay, so here's an example of dialogue or action beginning your story. Asking a question. You can start a story off with, maybe let's say you're retelling the story your first day of 6th grade or the first day of elementary school. And maybe you can kind of put a thought out there. This is an inner dialogue, inner question. Why does trouble always follow me around? Do I have a kick me sign on my back or something? So you're kind of posing a question to the audience. Another way that you can do this, how could I ever forget the most important day of my life? So it kind of makes you want to read more. It's like, okay, well, that's interesting. Let's find the answer to this question. The reader kind of wants to dive in. It pulls that reader in a little bit. One of my favorites is just describing the setting from the get-go. So find a part of your story that maybe you can give a really great description of a setting, and that will pull the reader in. So remember, guys, setting is what it looks like around you, what it sounds like around you, what it smells like, what it feels like. So you want to really go into the environment around you at that time, or whatever story you're choosing to tell. So here's an example. The sun peeked through my bedroom window as I crawled out of bed. Opening my window, I could hear the trees swaying in the wind and the breeze caressing my hair. So again, I think setting falls in great with sensory details, sense of sight, smell, taste, touch, feel. So keep that in mind as you're describing your setting. And setting is really important in the beginning of a story and throughout the story as well. So describing your setting in the very, very beginning lines of your story really kind of pulls that reader in. Here's another example. I sat cradled in 3 branches at the top of an old oak behind my house. I could see over the rooftop, could see for miles. Overhead, planes lined up in the sky, heading toward O'Hare Airport to land one by one. So you're giving the reader an opportunity to visualize the story they're about to read. Background information. So you can begin with background information. Maybe you took a family trip to the beach and you want to let your reader know, that you go to the beach every summer with your family, and it's a really important time to you to spend it with your family and bond. And so that would be an example of background information. You're giving the reader a little bit of information up front to understand the story a little bit better. So, for example, Tommy is my little brother and he's in the 1st grade. He's fearless. One day he wore a cape to school and I told him everyone would laugh at him. The next day, 5 other boys came wearing capes. So this person would be giving background information, telling the reader that Tommy is their brother. There's background information. And he's in the 1st grade. So it's allowing the reader to understand who Tommy is before they read the story. Another one, my family and I go on, like I said, go on vacation each year. It is the time I look forward to the most because I get to spend it with the people that I love. So you're giving the reader some background information on the fact that you and your family go on one vacation each year and you really look forward to it. So it really just allows the reader to understand the background to the story. And this is another one of my favorites, flash the ending, then leap back to the beginning. And this is actually what I did in my piece when I was working with you guys. My moment in my piece is what I'm going to focus on, holding my daughter Emma for the first time in my arms. That was the moment I'm going to kind of hone in on. So I'm going to start with that moment in the very, very beginning, but I'm not going to give too much detail because you don't want to give everything away. You want to give a little snippet so you kind of pull the reader in. So holding Emma in my arms was an experience I will never forget. I would say maybe 1 to 2 sentences max on the starting with when you start with your ending, and then you go right to the beginning. You go right back up to the beginning. I hear the car start up and my heart was pounding. We were going to meet our baby for the first time and I couldn't wait. So notice how I kind of flash the ending and then stop and move right to the beginning. So the reader at this part is like, oh my gosh, I have to read it. I want to find out how this happens. You're kind of like teasing the reader a little bit. All right, so your turn, practice. So I want you guys to practice with each strategy. If you want to write it in your notebook, you can. You can also get a doc on Google Docs and type, practicing using one of the strategies to start. Once you've written a few sentences, maybe 3 to 4 sentences as a starter, I want you to read that starter along with the story that you've already written. So kind of plop it in the beginning and listen and read it out loud. Reading it out loud is a really great strategy because it allows you to hear it. And when you hear it, it sounds different from when you just read it in your head. So you'll be able to understand it and hear it better and be able to choose your favorite. So choose your favorite one. And once you have done that, you continue drafting your piece. I want you, at whatever point you're reading this or listening to this, I want you to write for 25 to 30 minutes straight, or longer if you can, of course, if you can go longer. And I want you to continue tomorrow. So throughout these weeks, guys, we're going to be drafting and editing our pieces and eventually turning them in. So stay tuned for another lesson tomorrow to continue your draft. I think I'm going to plan for Friday. We will have an opportunity to share our writing via video conference using Zoom. So we used Zoom this morning in a staff meeting for the first time. And it's just like a conference tool. You guys can kind of do an audio of your voice, or you can do video. And so it shows the whole class, including myself, up there, and we can share out loud our writing And I want to also do a Socratic seminar based off of a Newsella article that I'll assign to you guys this week using Zoom. So I'm curious, this will be my first time doing this with you guys. So I think it'll be fun if you guys will participate in this. We'll see how it goes. And yeah, of course, make sure you are checking Google Classroom daily. I will post updates. Notice I posted an update here that I'd like for you to read. I just sent out a mass email to all parent, guardian, and students, so please check that. Also, I will be posting this PowerPoint separate from this video. So if you want to go back and just kind of on your leisure, go back to each one to look at it without having to pause the video, you can do that as well. So this is my first time doing this, you guys, and bear with me. It's fun. I'm excited to try it with you. But definitely bear with me and ask any questions that you guys have. All right, until next time.